Today we are going to look at a case from the second part of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to the USA. In 1871, Jamestown in New York was a growing industrial town in Chautauqua County, situated next to Chautauqua Lake. It was a busy community of workshops, mills, foundries and small businesses, and people often arrived there looking for work and opportunity. At the western edge of Jamestown stood a brewery operated by a man named Charles Marlow, a German immigrant who had owned and managed the establishment for about 2 years. He lived there with his wife Augusta, their 2 children, and Mr. Marlow's mother-in-law, Mrs. Julia Rotman. There was one full-time employee at the brewery, a young Polish worker named Balanty Benkowski. He spoke very little English, but understood some German. There were also 2 part-time workers, who helped whenever needed. The brewery was a popular place in Jamestown, and Mr. Marlow had established a reputation as a hard-working and industrious man. Everyone knew, however, that he was heavily in debt. Despite the brewery's apparent success, the cost of establishing and maintaining the business had placed Mr. Marlow under constant financial strain. Creditors called regularly, payments were often delayed, and there were rumours that the enterprise, prosperous as it appeared from the outside, survived only through borrowed money and Mr. Marlow's determination to keep it afloat. While Mr. Marlow struggled to keep his business running, in August 1871, a man named William Bachman arrived in Jamestown, telling people that he was looking for land and property. He had travelled from Toledo in Ohio and was pointed in the direction of a man named Louis Donner, who had a house for sale by the lake. He also spoke to Christian Smits, who wanted to sell his farm. Mr. Bachman seemed to intrigue the residents of Jamestown, and there were rumours about the amount of money he was carrying. Some claimed it to be $1,400, while others said that they heard him say that it was $6,000. On Tuesday the 15th of August 1871, Mr. Bachman visited the brewery around lunchtime and struck up a conversation in German with Mr. Marlow. The 2 men appeared to get on well. Both were hard-working immigrants, accustomed to long hours of labour and far from their homeland. Before long, Mr. Marlow invited him to stay at the brewery house for the night. Mr. Bachman accepted the offer, but explained that he had some business to attend to first. At around 11 o'clock that evening, he returned, and Mr. Marlow escorted him to a room opposite the one that was occupied by his worker, Balanty Benkowski. The next morning, August the 16th, Balanty Benkowski rose at around 5 a.m., and Mr. Bachman awoke shortly afterwards. Both men went downstairs and had a glass of beer before Mr. Bachman departed. Once he had gone, Mr. Marlow spoke to his worker about him. He said that although the man had claimed to possess a large amount of money, he was not convinced that he actually had any money at all, so would go to the centre of Jamestown to find out whether anyone knew anything about him or could confirm the truth of his story. Charles Marlow then loaded beer kegs onto a wagon and left. However, strangely, at around 11 a.m, he returned to the brewery, accompanied by William Bachman. The 2 men entered the brewery together. Mr. Bachman removed his coat and hat and placed them on a bench before carrying them into the drinking room. There the men poured beer and talked. Balanty Benkowski went outside to continue his work. When he returned a short time later, he noticed that all the doors were open, including the trapdoor leading to the cellar. As he moved towards it, he heard the voices of Mr. Marlow and Mr. Bachman, and he also noticed that on the table was Mr. Bachman's hat and 2 partly filled glasses of beer. Mr. Benkowski then went outside again to chop up wood. When he came back inside, he saw that nothing had changed. The coats and hats remained where they had been, and the voices were still coming from the cellar. He thought no more of it, and went outside again. When he returned for a 3rd time, everything was silent. He thought this a bit strange, but then he heard what he thought was the sound of a gun being fired. This made him quite frightened, so he quickly went back outside and stayed there for a while. Eventually he calmed himself and went back to the brewery, where he saw Mr. Charles Marlow emerge from the cellar and noticed that he had blood smeared across his forehead and spots of blood on his boots and shirts. Before Balanty Benkowski could speak, a customer arrived to buy some beer, so Mr. Marlow went to the cellar and brought up a large keg. Trying to be helpful, Balanty offered to wash it, but Mr. Marlow told him that there was no need as he could do it himself. Everyone then went to the dining room, where Mrs. Marlow had served dinner. However, on this day, Mr. Marlow barely ate. He seemed agitated, as if something was bothering him. When Augusta Marlow asked him why he was not eating, he replied that he had eaten a sausage earlier and was not hungry. After food, Mr. Marlow instructed his worker to gather wood and said that he was going to clean the beer barrels. Afterwards, he went into the brew house, but the heat inside was almost unbearable. A large fire burned beneath the boiler inside the brick furnace arch, and the kettle stood nearly full. The air was so hot that it was difficult to remain there for long. Valenti asked Mr. Marlow why the fire was so intense, but he received no reply. The following day, Valenti started with his duties by going to the cellar, but he noticed that it smelt of blood. Remembering what Mr. Marlow had said about William Bachman the previous morning, he started to become suspicious. So once Mr. Marlow left to go into Jamestown, he began searching the premises himself. He discovered a paper collar, a blood-stained towel fragment, and a piece of cheese wrapped in paper, something he remembered seeing William Bachman with. In another part of the cellar, he found bloodstains on the floor that appeared to show a body had been dragged across the room. Convinced a murder had taken place, and now very frightened, he decided to leave the employment of Mr. Marlow. At dinner, he told him that he was leaving. He gave little explanation and tried to remain calm, though his manner made it clear that he wished to go as quickly as possible. Mr. Marlow questioned him as to why he was leaving so abruptly and asked if he had seen anything. Valenti replied that he had not, then took his belongings and left the premises. He walked into the town of Worksburg, where he stayed that night, and the following day he boarded a train to Dunkirk. In Dunkirk there were many Polish immigrants who had travelled to North America in search of work, and when Valenti came across some, he spoke about what he believed he had discovered at the brewery, and described the bloodstains and other items he had found in the cellar. News of his suspicions spread rapidly through the Polish community, and police soon brought him in for questioning. He told them about everything that he had seen, and on the 19th of August 1871, Charles H. Marlow was arrested on suspicion of murder. Investigators and local officials searched the brewery. In the ashes of the furnace, they discovered charred human remains, including fragments of bone and part of a human arm with an elbow intact. In the cellar and the ice house, detectives found blood trails across the floor and stains that suggested a bleeding body had been dragged through the rooms. In a beer barrel, they found ashes and after a closer inspection, discovered more remains. Pieces of skull, finger bones, toe bones, 15 human teeth, shoe nails, vest buttons, a vest buckle, and 2 ivory shirt studs. Now believing that William Bachman had been murdered, an inquest began. A coroner's jury was quickly assembled, and the jurors visited the brewery to examine the scene and view what the police had discovered there. When they returned to the coroner's court, Valenti Bankowski gave testimony. His English was very limited, so he did so through an interpreter. He told how Mr. Bachman had visited the brewery on the 15th of August, stayed the night, spoken at length to Mr. Marlow, and then was never seen again. He also told of how he went to the cellar, found bloodstains, and of the intense fire that burned in the brew house. Doctors confirmed that the bones found at the scene were human. However, on the advice of Mr. Marlow's attorney, neither he or his wife gave evidence. When the inquest finished, the jury concluded that William Bachman had been murdered on the 16th of August 1871 at around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They believed that Charles Marlow had shot and killed him, and that Augusta Marlow had acted as an accomplice. The formal indictment against the couple, however, was extraordinarily broad and reflected the uncertainty surrounding the victim's final moments and the condition in which the remains had been discovered. Prosecutors alleged that death may have been caused by shooting, stabbing, blows from a hammer, wounds inflicted by an axe, burning, or several other violent means. These indictments were not uncommon in 19th century murder cases, when medical evidence could not always conclusively establish a single cause of death. By listing numerous possible methods, the prosecution ensured that the charge would remain valid, regardless of which injuries had ultimately proved to be fatal. However, despite these findings, many Jamestown residents did not believe that Mr. and Mrs. Marlow were responsible for the death of Mr. Bachman. After the evidence was reviewed, the case against Mrs. Marlow was dropped, and the trial of her husband, Charles Marlow, began on the 20th of September 1871. He pleaded not guilty. The state's primary witness was Valentin Benkowski, who, like at the coroner's inquest, testified through an interpreter. He stated that Mr. Bachman had visited the brewery on the 15th of August and that Mr. Marlow had mentioned the man was carrying a large sum of money. He said that the following day, he thought that he heard a gunshot coming from the cellar and not long afterwards saw blood upon Mr. Marlow's face. He then said that he went into the cellar where he saw the floors had been washed, but there were bloodstains on the stones and there was also a towel with blood marks on it. He said that when he went to the brew room, the furnace was very hot and that it smelt very strange. The prosecution also introduced testimony from Mr. Marlow's neighbours, all of who recalled thick black smoke and foul odours coming from the brewery on the 16th of August. Professor Armstrong testified that chemical analysis conducted on the stains and materials recovered from the brewery indicated the presence of human blood. His evidence was regarded as particularly important, as it provided scientific support for the prosecution's claim that a violent killing had taken place on the premises. However, at the time, forensic science was still developing, and it was not scientifically possible to reliably distinguish between human and animal bloodstains. Nevertheless, the testimony carried considerable weight with the jury, who viewed the findings as a strong confirmation that the brewery had been the scene of a brutal crime. By this stage, the case against Charles Marlow appeared overwhelming. The prosecution had presented suspicious behaviour, physical evidence had been recovered from the brewery cellar, witness testimonies from Valentin Benkowski and the professor claiming that human blood had been found at the scene. Taken together, the evidence painted an increasingly damaging picture that was going to be difficult for the defence to explain away. However, Charles Lockwood, the defence attorney for Mr. Marlow, then produced a dramatic reversal in the proceedings. He stood up in court, and to the shock of the prosecution and everyone in the gallery, admitted that the remains found in the furnace were those of William Bachman. However, he denied that Charles Marlow had committed murder. He started by arguing that with the cellar trapdoor shut, a gunshot could not be distinguished from the sound of striking a beer keg. He then told the court that Mr. Marlow had returned to Jamestown that afternoon and did not have sufficient time to kill a man or to burn a body. Then Mr. Lockwood stunned the courtroom. He said that Mr. Bachman came to his death at the hands of Mrs. Julia Ortman. Once everyone in court had regained their composure, he said that William Bachman was not nearly as wealthy as he claimed, and that when he was on his own with Mrs. Augusta Marlow, he attacked her, threw her to the floor, and began choking her. Hearing the struggles, Mrs. Marlow's mother, Mrs. Julia Ortman, rushed to help her daughter, but unable to separate them, she seized a hammer and struck Mr. Bachman in the temple. Looking straight at the jury, Mr. Lockwood then said that Mr. Bachman fell to the floor, and when the two ladies looked at him, they realised that he was dead. The courtroom was silent for a few moments before Mrs. Julia Ortman was called to the witness stand. Through an interpreter, she repeated the story told by Mr. Lockwood and added that after the killing, she and her daughter had carried the body to the furnace and burned it to conceal the death. She insisted that her son-in-law knew nothing about the killing until after his arrest. The defence hoped that this testimony would discredit Valentin Benkowski and present an alternative explanation for the death. The trial lasted for a week before the prosecution and defence gave their closing arguments, and the judge summed up the case. The jury were then sent out to consider the verdict. However, despite much deliberation, they were unable to agree. 6 jurors favoured conviction and 6 acquittal. A mistrial was declared, and Charles Marlow was returned to jail. A second trial opened in January 1872. Much of the evidence mirrored the first trial, though prosecutors presented the details more thoroughly. Mrs. Julia Ortman's confession that had previously shocked the courtroom was scrutinised, and it soon became apparent that the old woman's story was a deliberate falsehood, conceived and carried out for the purpose of clearing her son-in-law's name. This time the jury only deliberated for 3.5 hours before returning a verdict of guilty, and the judge sentenced Charles Marlow to death. When he heard the verdict and the sentence, he exhibited no visible emotion. Instead, he retained the same stern appearance which had marked him throughout the trial. His wife, however, who had been seated very close to him, burst into tears. She was not the only one to do so. Many women who had been sitting in the gallery also started to cry. Charles Marlow was then taken to Mayville Prison to await his execution. While there, he remained very much in the public eye. During his imprisonment, He attempted to escape by trying to saw through the bars of his cell window with 2 small saws. The attempt was discovered before he could make any real progress, and when prison officers investigated how the tools had entered the jail, they concluded that they had been concealed in the heels of a pair of slippers Mrs. Augusta Marlow had delivered to her husband. Following the discovery of the escape attempts, prison authorities tightened their watch over Mr. Marlow and transferred him to another cell, where he was kept under far stricter supervision. Public interest in the case only intensified as the date fixed for his execution drew closer, and it seemed certain that he would soon be led to the gallows. Then, on the very eve of his scheduled hanging, a dramatic reprieve arrived. It emerged that one of the jurors at the second trial, a man named Sebastian Loren, had already formed the opinion that Mr. Marlow was guilty before the proceedings had even begun. His defence team immediately sought to secure another trial, but on the 11th of June the matter came before the Supreme Court, where the conviction and sentence were upheld. A new execution date was fixed for the 2nd of August. Mr. Marlow continued to deny responsibility for William Bachman's disappearance, but on the 1st of August, the eve of his execution, he finally gave a full account of the killing. He said that the 2 men had spent time drinking together in the brewery before he persuaded Mr. Bachman to accompany him to the cellar. He said that he added strychnine to a glass of beer and handed it to him. He said that although the poison caused severe convulsions, Mr. Bachman did not die immediately, so he seized an iron bar and struck him repeatedly on the head. He said that after the murder, he dismembered the body and put the pieces into the brewery furnace. He admitted that Augusta Marlow knew what had happened and that she later assisted him in removing and scattering the ashes. This confession confirmed what the police had already suspected, that Mr. Marlow had killed Mr. Bachman to rob him of the money he was carrying. In a somewhat chilling last remark, Mr. Marlow said that he would have also murdered Ballanty Bankowski if he had realised that any suspicion had fallen upon him. When Charles Marlow was led out to the gallows, there were so many spectators that the sheriff instructed those at the front to kneel in order that people further back might see the proceedings. At 10 minutes past 12, on Friday the 2nd of August 1872, Charles Marlow was hanged. He left behind his wife Augusta and their 2 young children, a boy of 6 and a little girl aged 3. Mrs. Marlow was not able to keep the brewery going, so accompanied by her children and her mother, she left Jamestown and went to live at Parker's Landing in Pennsylvania. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next Brief Case.